up there? Welcome to Education for the 21st Century. I am Dr. Floyd Beecham, and we're being joined by, as always, on the far end here, Tashina Kabaz.
Hello.
And as our guest today, we have Dr. Jihyun Kim, who is an assistant professor in educational leadership, Lehigh University College of Education. On our show, Education for the 21st Century, we take a look at different kinds of educational leadership issues, higher education, K-12, various challenges, perspectives, problems, and try to reach insight through engaging conversation. And for the introduction, I'll turn it over to Tashina.
Thank you, Dr. Beecham. Dr. Kim received her doctorate degree in educational policy from Michigan State University, a master's in elementary educational administration, and a bachelor's in elementary education at Seoul National University of Education. Before joining the Ph.D. program, she worked as a teacher for 5th and 6th grade students in elementary school in Korea. Her research interests include teaching quality, teachers' social network, policy implementation, and principals leadership. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So, Dr. Kim, can you please tell us about how you became interested in educational policy?
So I was a teacher, as just Tashina said, in Korea, and I worked as a homeroom teacher, regular homeroom teacher for 5th graders and 6th graders. And I became interested in policy because I saw some discrepancies between policy and practice, and especially in teacher evaluation setting. I was evaluated by a new system in Korea, teacher evaluation system, and I realized that, okay, we spent a lot of money, time, resources on implementing the policy, but actually there was no significant effect of the policy. And I thought, okay, why that happened? And I realized that, okay, when you think about policy making process, there are not many people who can understand both sides of this world, like practice and policy and practice and research. And I feel like, okay, in the future, I want to be bridge between these two groups, and I want to say, okay, I understand what's actually going on in classroom, and I want to study further in policy to kind of bridge these two worlds together. So that's how I became interested in policy.
Nice.
Okay, and that just reminds me, and even though you were talking about the Korean context, similar, there's a similar kind of dichotomy, it's a similar kind of situation here in the United States as we think about the problems with regard to what we see in practice versus trying to create policy to impact that practice. So, the very same things you were probably investigating and thinking about over there are just as relevant and current here in the States.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about your area of expertise?
Sure. Again, I'm studying policy, and especially teacher evaluation policies and teacher-related policy, from teacher hiring, teacher prep, teacher training, PD, collaboration, and retention, turnover. So all about teachers and teacher social network. I'm interested in how teachers learn from each other, how they grow as a professional, and things like that. Yep.
Okay. Now, some of your work is pretty interesting. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit more about the social network component for any of our viewers and listeners who may not know.
So I have been studying how teachers talk to each other and how teachers impact each other. So, for example, I recently published a paper about how teachers' burnout level affect early career teachers' burnout level. When they talk to each other, they probably share some emotion, and that could represent some, the level of resources available at school. So actually, based on social network analysis, we can see how teachers' interaction with each other affect teachers' burnout level.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Along those same lines of policy, so how do you think educational policy impacts the work of educational leaders if you take it to the leadership level?
Yeah, so I think policy, especially teacher evaluation policy, for example, shape the role of educational leaders. For example, now new teacher evaluation system, it requires principals to be instructional leader, and principals have to be capable of providing good feedback for teachers and kind of be an expert of different subject matters and teaching and things like that. So in that sense, I see policy shape the role of principals at each school level and district level too, the district administrators too. So that's how I think. But at the same time, I think leadership also shape policy too, because I'm also studying policy implementation, and the effect of policy is almost always dependent on the implementers of the policy. So how principals or district administrators implement the policy really determine the effects of any policies related to education.
Yes.
So I'd like to know a bit more about your perception of the U.S. educational system, and how does it relate to your international experience as an educator?
So the two things I thought about that. So one is local control. So that is very unique nature of U.S. system, I think, and which is very different from other places. Especially in Korea, we have very centralized government system, and we don't have federal government level, but the government determines everything related to curriculum, textbook, or tests, everything. But here in the United States, curriculum can be different, and testing and things like that, although we have seen a lot of federal control over the education recently. But so that, I think that was very interesting, and also it allows community can participate in the decision-making process here. But in other systems like Korea, I would say it's kind of hard because it's not locally controlled there. So that part, I could definitely see some pros and cons, but I think that's quite different characteristic of U.S. system.
Yeah, I mean, with the United States, I mean, it's first of all, it's such a vast system, with the many states, the many cities, the many local school boards.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting.
So part. It makes it very, very unique.
I'm wondering for teachers to get their certificate, how much does that differ from the U.S. to like South Korea?
So I can tell you about the elementary school education certificate and teaching certificate. I mean, so in order to get the certificate, you have to graduate one of National University of Education. So we share the same curriculum, and it's a national university system, so which is very different from here, the system here. And then after 4 years of teacher prep training, you will get the certificate. And then in order to be a public school teacher, you have to pass national exam at each province. So I would say it is very unified system in Korea. So it's quite different.
How's the pay?
That's a good question. So it's not that high, but I think it's a good compared to many other profession, I think. But it's good enough, I think. But we wouldn't say that's really good, but we have a really good pension system too. So teachers teaching job in Korea is very popular and highly regarded.
I was wondering about that. How are teachers regarded in South Korea?
Yeah, it's socially respected. And we have very, cultural background and cultural tradition that respect teachers' job and things like that. So we think really highly of teachers.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, could you please discuss, I mean, I think you brought this up earlier, that whole divide between policy and practice, and, several others there are several researchers and individuals who are interested and are also trying to address the same issue. So what are some ways in which we can try to bridge the gap between policy and practice?
Mm-hmm. So I think we need to think about the issue from both sides, like from policy side and practitioner side or researcher side. We have to think about this issue not just from one side. So from policymakers' perspective, I have been thinking about policy feedback framework. So policy making process and implementation process. After that, policymakers should listen what the implementers of the policy have to say about the policy, and then it could goes into the policy making process again, and in order to improve the policy design for the future. So I can see this type of framework can enhance the connection between these two worlds. And from my perspective as a researcher, I always try to keep it in mind, okay, I was a teacher, and I try to keep that sense of like daily life of school, and because sometimes a researcher in front of computer, we just see numbers and interview transcripts, and then think about, okay, how can we just publish this paper? But I still, I feel like it's very important to keep it in mind, okay, I'm doing this work in order to improve the education system out there, not just in front of my computer. And then I don't want to just publish paper that no one wanted to read. And then nothing has changed.
Well, you brought up another good point. I mean, that's another divide sometimes, the idea of the scholarship in which we do, the peer-reviewed kind of scholarship that sometimes only is published in, certain outlets with a certain readership, versus the idea of how do we get that out to a broader practice, a broader audience, a wider audience of folks, because there's great value in the research that's being done. And then there's also, for the researcher to recognize that, the kind of great things that are happening in practice that can inform the research. So you kind of talked about that policy practice, that feedback loop, looping back that information. I think the same thing is also important with regard to the kind of work we do, impacting practice, back to impacting research.
So as a researcher, I think we can definitely be a bridge between practice and policy too, because policymakers, probably they want to know more about what research says, and practitioner, they want to know more about the research too, so we can kind of bridge these two worlds together.
Excellent.
Do you have any final thoughts?
That's a good question. So I hope I can contribute to this bridging role, and try to connect these two different worlds together. And any other questions?
Other questions? Tashina, anything else?
Nothing that I can think of at the moment, but I think it's really important, you being here and talking about this divide, because sometimes people aren't even aware of it. I mean, even parents aren't aware of all the various levels that come in with education. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, our listening and viewing audience. Again, if you want to continue the conversation, check us out on Facebook at Education for the 21st Century. And you can also check out my website, Dr. Floyd D. Beecham. It's a URL. I don't remember it right now.
Through WordPress. Thanks,
Tashina. Again, thank you all for your careful attention. We'll be back again next month with another edition of Education for the 21st Century. Also, if you get a chance, look up the book, Educational Leadership in Music and Improving the Lives of Vulnerable Children, both texts that are out right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your viewing and listening. Thank you to our guest.
Thank you.
Tashina, as always.
Dr. Beecham.
And we will see you next time.